This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
The pre-recording process this week has been an absolute nightmare. Just a travesty. And I knew that if I watched both nights of SummerSlam, it was going to completely throw off my recording schedule. I just had to give in to peer pressure. Was it all worth it? Not really, no. But what's done is done. So I am currently recording this portion of the Friday show before I even finish editing and uploading the Monday show. But since I know I'm going to need Monday evening to finish my SummerSlam thoughts, there's no way I'm going to be able to fit in a WCW recap on top of all that, which is when I normally start my recording stages for the Friday episode. Like I said, the whole thing is a mess. But I'm going to make it work. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report, the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. We are here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays to bring you a range of classic wrestling talk from WWF to WCW to Midsouth to World Class. I've been doing so much rabbit hole diving into classic wrestling over the past several years. I'm almost living in a time machine. It's still never the same without watching with my brothers, but I'm still enjoying the run nonetheless. Reliving the nostalgia. Well, we are back to a normal schedule for the Friday show. Hope everyone's doing well if you're joining me this week. It's another one of those episodes where I don't really have much in the way of BS stories to tell, so I guess we can dive into the content and get going with the reports. Got to admit, I'm kind of digging watching the old footage of these Saturday night TBS shows on YouTube. Especially when the first thing you see when you click the video is a screen cap that reads video calibration in the good old VHS font. It's my fucking childhood right there, bro. I live for the days of VHS tapes. That made me so happy. It was literally on screen for a millisecond, but damn it all if it wasn't the best millisecond of the entire show. I wish the other 39 minutes could have been as good. Oh, to be fair, the last 10 minutes of the show was pretty great. So, this is the first TV taping after the '89 Great American Bash pay-per-view. A show that I still enjoyed going back and rewatching, despite how bleak things were for WCW around this time. You would still get the occasional great pay-per-view to mask all the booking problems and the fact that everybody in management was a bumbling buffoon. But now we're back to reality. And we are technically still in Bash season. They had, I think, one final bash tour date for Atlanta the following night. And if I recall correctly, having listened to Jim Cornette do the timeline retrospective on WCW from '89, pretty sure they drew a dismal house number for that event. We had JR and Gary Hart in the cold open here plugging the Atlanta show and doing a little bit of touch-up on Gary's new faction that we saw debut at the Bash. And then we go directly to the ring for our opening match on this week's card. It's Bob Emery and George South taking on the Skyscrapers. And for anybody that didn't hear my riveting take on the Skyscrapers versus the Dynamic Dudes from the Bash pay-per-view, I encourage you to pause the show and go listen to that. It is just as horrible as it sounds on paper. I still maintain that is one of the all-time worst tag matches to ever air on pay-per-view in any major wrestling organization. So, well, the good news is this match was far better than what we saw in Baltimore. Dan Spivey didn't have enough time to fuck up every move in the book. The bad news is the match still sucked. And that was solely because of the fact that Spivey did all the work and never tagged in Sid one time. Despite the fact that everybody at center stage was clamoring to see Sid get involved. I don't know if Sid was hurt or unmotivated. Maybe it was a way to work the crowd so they didn't cheer whenever Sid actually got in. Whatever the case, it was still miserable to watch Spivey do anything physical. He got the win with a jackknife on Emery. And then we went to a Sting promo at the interview station. He was there talking about his upcoming match with the Great Muta in the Omni. A Dragon Shy Challenge match. Which even Sting admitted to not having any idea what the hell that means. I know I've made this joke like 50 times now. The fact that Gary Hart and Muta kept advertising this Dragon Shy Challenge stipulation for seemingly months. Yet at no point did they ever bother to explain what it was or how it differed from a regular match. But, yeah, that was pretty much it. Sting's going to wrestle a match where he's going in completely blind, not knowing what the rules are. Because he's an idiot. Apparently. Then we came back from break with Terry Funk and Gary Hart at the booth. And as Funk's promoting the World Heavyweight title rematch between him and Flair for the Omni, he's saying that Flair's going to need a whole congregation of people in his corner praying that he gets out of there alive. Then Gary said something about eating Flair up like a Borden house pie, which is apparently a Southern slang term. I have absolutely no clue what Borden house pie is, but it sounds enticing. Might have to look up a recipe for that later. They also ranted for like another minute. I didn't write anything down aside from Funk vowing that he'd be the next World Heavyweight Champion. It was funny listening to Funk continually cut off Gary while he's trying to cut the heel promo for him. Dude couldn't get a word in edgewise. Like, I'm sitting there like, Terry, shut up and let Gary say stuff. You're just making him look like a spare prick at the wedding out there. So we had Wildfire Tommy Rich versus Trent Knight. Can you believe Tommy Rich was still only in his early 30s by 1989? I always forget that he broke in when he was like 18 or 19 years old. That's how long Tommy had been wrestling by this stage of his career. He was a grizzled veteran. I can't remember if we reviewed a Tommy Rich match on the TBS Superstation yet. I know we've talked about Johnny Rich. And I think we reviewed a Davey Rich match on the Saturday night show one time. The fake brother. But this would have been, I think, around the time frame where Tommy just came back to Georgia. He hadn't been active in the business for at least a couple years, I think. He was still working in Memphis by 87. That was the year he got involved in the Austin Idol Jerry Lawler hair match at the Midsouth Coliseum, turning heel and costing Lawler his hair. I think there are clips of that out there. So it was kind of weird when he showed up here as a babyface in 89. It also was not a particularly great run from what I remember because, like, I remember Tommy Rich being around in 89. I think he actually worked under a WCW contract for a couple years, but they never really did much of anything with him. I don't know if that had anything to do with him being a part of that older generation of talent that Jim Herd wasn't too keen on. You know, again, 32, 33 years old. He wasn't exactly a broken down fossil. But then again, he never really had much of a body. His work was okay at this point, but never anything all that remarkable. It's just odd to think that they brought in Tommy Rich, who was a big star in his own right about a decade prior in the same region of the country. But by 89, it was just almost a completely different market of fans watching. I don't think the people really had much of a vested interest in Tommy Rich by this point. Especially not after being exposed to the likes of Sting and Ricky Steamboat, the Great Muta, like all these hot names that were doing all kinds of cool shit. And to be fair, the match here was a total snooze fest. The wrestling was fine. There was nothing wrong with anything they did. But it was literally the definition of a cold match with no reason to care. And whatever spark the people had with Tommy Rich in the Georgia area from about 10 years prior to this, it wasn't here. I'll tell you that much. We did learn that he would soon be challenging for the U.S. heavyweight title, which sounded very much like a last-minute change of plans once they found out that Steamboat was leaving. All of a sudden, Luger had no babyface challengers. Who can we throw into that spot? How about Tommy Rich? He's got nothing else going on at the moment. And speaking of the Handsome Devil, we had Luger join Jim Ross at the interview booth here for a promo. And if you know anything when it comes to Lex Luger promos, they're always quite attention-grabbing. There's always that line or series of phrases that you stop and ask, the hell is he talking about? My favorite here was when he referenced Steamboat by saying that the NWA has finally removed the malignant tumor from the equation. He also at one point said that he's become the Michael Tyson of the NWA. Not Mike Tyson, Michael Tyson. Because clearly people always refer to him by his full name. But Yeah, he's got Rick Steiner in the Omni tomorrow night. He told Steiner that his credentials are unmatched, but he still doesn't match up to the total package. Missed a golden opportunity to make a dick joke there. The Luger was way too serious to be making cock references. He was a good Christian man. You know who wasn't too serious to steer away from cock jokes? It was Michael P.S. Hayes. I tried to make a clear segue there, and it fell completely flat. I also skipped over the Road Warriors killing John Brewer and Fred Avery in a tag squash. It went about as you'd expect. They were most definitely killed. And then we had Michael Hayes joining Paulie dangerously for the Danger Zone. And I'm probably not the first to tell you, I had my fair share of issues with the Freebird run in '89. Specifically the fact that they were just not very pleasant to do business with because of being on the sauce a lot of the time. That and thinking they were the second coming of the fucking Road Warriors. With that said, this was easily one of the best things on the entire show. Outside everything that happened in the main event. This Michael Hayes promo. Say what you want about him. Guy could talk his ass off. He did everything in his power to make the War Games rematch look like the biggest attraction match in the history of wrestling. Talking about how nobody brings the Freebirds into their backyard and makes them bleed. Nobody brings the Freebirds onto their home turf and puts them down. There isn't a commission or board of directors in the country that can stop whatever happens in that War Games cage. Of course, he brings it home with the classic line, "Heaven don't want us, and hell's afraid we're going to take over." Keep in mind, too, this is all literally being done to promote a War Games feud that nobody, and I emphasize, nobody ever talks about. When you think of classic War Games rivalries, how many people do you ever hear mention anything about the Freebirds and the SST versus the Midnight Express, the Road Warriors, and Dr. Death? Well, it's because it's not a classic War Games feud. The talent in there is impeccable, but it's just kind of a blasé program. But damn it all, Michael Hayes had a job to do. He had to make sure everybody knew how important this rematch was. And it was great delivery. And that was followed with, well, low-key, as stupid as the whole thing was, it was actually pretty damn funny. It's one of those examples where only Rick Steiner can pull off being an absolute bumbling moron, but you still take him seriously as somebody that could believably beat your ass, because it's 100% fact. So here's the punchline. Rick Steiner bought him and JR front row tickets for the Omni tomorrow night. But because Rick's a dope, he doesn't realize that he's wrestling on the card. Therefore, he gets into the building for free. As does JR, because they're both employed with the Turner Network. But what made the whole interaction great was that Rick is trying to justify buying tickets by saying, they're front row. Which means they get the best seat in the house. He doesn't know where any of the other jabronis on the card are sitting. But they won't be front row. Therefore, they're missing out. And you know, he's kind of got a point there. Watching from a monitor in the back somewhere, arguably not as fun as sitting front row ringside. So maybe Rick is not much of an idiot as we think. He thought this through very well. I did also like JR commenting, "All right, Rick, I'll get the popcorn, you get the hot dogs, and we'll be good to go." And then Rick just goes, "I can't. I spent all my money on the tickets." There ain't nobody like the Steiners, ma'am. There is a reason they're still among my all-time favorite tag teams. Still not quite ahead of the Midnight or the Rock and Roll Express, or even the Road Warriors for that matter. But definitely in the top 10 for me. They were a gem. You know who won't rank in my top 10 of all-time favorite tag teams? Jack Victory and Rip Morgan of the New Zealand Militia. I know. Shocking news to hear in 2025. So, I believe this is Jack Victory's 50th gimmick in the year 1989 alone. He went from being Paulie's Secret Service agent to now he's an honorary New Zealander. Even though he was born in like New Jersey. Well, they wrestled Sting and Eddie Gilbert. This is their advertised TV main event. Do not ask me how. By default, it was the best wrestling match in the entire show. Not that the competition was all that high to begin with. I like that in addition to Victory and Morgan wearing war face paint with cargo pants, they also had a gimmicked boomerang that they used to get heat. There's something very amusing about how cornball the whole thing was. But they used that to get the heat on Gilbert. There were some wacky double team spots at the end during the babyface flurry. Sting wound up giving Victory the Stinger Splash, followed by the Scorpion. But right before Victory submitted, Terry Funk and Muta hit the ring for the disqualification, at which point a bunch of pandemonium ensued. First, they went after Gilbert with a branding iron, leaving Sting in there to fend for himself at the disadvantage. Funk ended up driving his boot into Sting's face before Flair came out to make the save. And as Flair's running wild for a minute, the heels were able to cut him off with a cowboy boot and turn things back in their favor. And then Sting ended up stealing Terry's boot and warded off the heels by himself. And that's where everybody just started going after each other with boots. And it was a hell of a segue into the closing 3 minutes of the television show, with Flair, Sting, and Eddie Gilbert at the interview booth. This is just awesome shit. It brings me back to those old TBS shows from like 86 when the Horsemen were out there every week cutting these crazy off-the-wall promos. People going nuts for everything. You have Flair showing up wearing Terry's cowboy boots, talking about how tomorrow night in the Omni, where the girls are as hot as the summer nights, it's going to be him, Sting, and Gilbert lighting up Atlanta by beating the crap out of Muta and Funk. He said that at one point he never would have dreamed of standing side by side with the Stinger. Not after their checkered past. But all is fair in love and war. And, I do have to say, the visual of seeing Flair and Sting together as babyfaces, it's one of those moments where you can kind of pull the curtain back and think, this is the moment these two became the closest of friends. Like, you just watch the way they interacted out there together. You can tell they legitimately love doing business together. Like that simultaneous Sting howl and Flair woo into the mic, it was just iconic. I mean, you can't fake passion like that. I loved every minute of that post-match angle and the follow-up promo. Seriously, this is the kind of stuff that I miss reviewing on these classic tapes, man. The crazy personalities and out-of-control promos every week. Guys are just on the sauce and whacked out of their minds, but fuck, it was great television. And just think, too, we used to get this shit for 2 hours every week on the TBS Superstation a couple years ago. Now you get them once in a blue moon whenever Jim Herd decides to let the boys actually cut promos. So at least the show went out on a high note. It was a rough 25 minutes until we got to the main event, but it was well worth the wait. It's just hysterical to think that these people actually thought the promo material did more harm than good. The George Scotts and the Jim Herds of the world, they were so anti-promo because all they wanted to do was see the boys wrestle. Fuck, wouldn't you know it? Promos were the best parts of the whole show. Sting and Flair, Michael Hayes. Even the Rick Steiner JR banter was entertaining, as goofy as it was. I'd rather watch that for an hour straight than Dan Spivey working a glorified handicap match for 2 minutes. But hey, guess I'm out of touch, right? I'm not into what the Utes like these days, where you gotta span the entire god-blessed show with nothing but wrestling matches. Because that's the only thing that matters. It's all about the moves. Geez, what company does that sound like in 2025? Beats me. Well, it's the big one, people. We talked a little last week about this being JYD's final swan song in Midsouth. Turns out my memory was a lot better than I remember. August 4th, 1984. The final Midsouth appearance for the Junkyard Dog before his abrupt departure for the WWF. And boy, did he go out in a blaze of glory. I genuinely don't even know what to say about that tag match. I mean, it ran the whole gamut from great to downright embarrassing when you factor in how badly they butchered the main angle. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. Talk about that once we get to the match. Our first item of business this week is to address the TV title situation, aka the worst storyline in Mid-South history. Terry Taylor's at ringside with Cowboy Watts. And it should be noted right from the jump here, Watts is now in possession of the television title that Dr. Death stole weeks ago and refused to give back to Terry. At no point here was it explained how or when Watts obtained possession of the medal, which was the bone of contention I had with the entire storyline from the get-go. The idea that Terry had his TV title stolen and held hostage for literally weeks. At no point during the last month did Terry ever think to just walk up to management and be like, hey, tell that motherfucker to give me my medal back. So, well, now he just gets it back. That was the payoff. They showed the clip last week when Dr. Death went back on his word, saying that if Terry beat Khrushchev in his title match, he would give the medal back to him. But instead he sucker punched Terry with it and left. And so, well, fast forward 1 week later, Bill Watts is just like, hey, Terry, got your medal back here. You are the champion after all. It's only fitting that you have possession of it. Wow. Glad to see it only took him fucking 4 weeks to figure that one out. Almost as if Watts just walked up to Dr. Death and said, give me that medal, you're fired. But again, we don't know because it was never mentioned how Watts got the medal back. But apparently it was a very simple process. This has got to be the most underwhelming payoff in the history of storylines. They couldn't even think to book an angle on television where Terry came out and tackled Dr. Death to the ground, beat his ass like a man possessed. Nope, they just haphazardly gave him the gimmick back and moved on like nothing ever happened. Fucking epic. So then we come back for the first match on this week's taping block. It's Hercules Hernandez versus Rocky Smith. It was actually Rocky King, if you remember a few years ago on the TBS Superstation reviews. He was one of the better enhancement guys next to names like George South and Mike Jackson. A great young black athlete with a hella marvelous physique. Man, was he shredded. Not as shredded as Hercules, mind you. Still in really great shape, though. So, Cornette got on the house mic beforehand and talked about the ongoing deal with Midsouth right now when it comes to weapon usage. He's still banned from using his tennis racket and or bringing it to ringside, period. And on top of that, if he's caught using the racket at any point, he will be hit with a fine and a subsequent suspension. He also went over to do commentary to provide unbiased perspective on the match at play. That's where we got a broader explanation of Hercules' new finish that he's using. It is a move that the Orientals mastered in Mongolian culture. The Shinanu Maki, which is a modified version of the Cobra Clutch hold. That's what he used to beat Rocky here. I don't know if Cornette was sick this week or just totally lost his voice, but he sounded horrible. He was really struggling to get through that segment. Might have caught a case of the JYD fever. The lethargic, exhausted disease. It rubs off on people the wrong way. But you know what? Even a hoarse, less than 50% Jim Cornette on the microphone, still 1,000 times better than Sonny King at 100% on the microphone. I want you all to think about this for a minute. They booked a sit-down interview between Bill Watts and Sonny King this week. And this was by no means a short talk segment. This was quite long. One might argue painfully long. I don't know who in their right mind thought this is a good idea, but fuck. This was bad. And I get that Sonny's kind of the centerpiece for this whole weapon ban story they're doing right now. I mean, he got jumped on TV a couple weeks ago by a bunch of heels and had his shoulder dislocated. Still doesn't mean that putting a mic in front of his mouth was ever a good idea. Now, granted, Watts was doing a good deal of talking at the beginning here by going over the timeline of no DQ stipulations in wrestling and how they became more popularized in the 70s when you had things like brass knucks championship matches and bunkhouse matches, coal miners glove matches. I mean, these are all stipulations mandated whenever two guys couldn't settle a score with rules. But now the landscape has changed. Now you got guys bringing out weapons to the ring unprovoked and using them to handle business in situations not pertaining to a sanctioned bout. Sonny felt the brunt of that a few weeks ago when Hercules drove that 2x4 into his shoulder and tried to cripple him. So, suffice it to say, Watts was doing a lot of covering here to try and keep Sonny quiet in the chair for as long as he possibly could. But then Sonny got to chime in. I kid you not. This is not even a rib. I wrote this exact quote down. This is the first thing out of Sonny's mouth for this promo. Quote, "You know what been going on around here. You know how things are set up. I knows what goes on in that dressing room. I'm one of them guys that's been there before. I know what their thoughts are and what they're trying to do." Okay, I'm going to pause there for a second. What? What in the absolute fuck did any of that word salad mean? I'm not even going to consider the horrible grammar here. Just on the surface, what the hell was Sonny King talking about? He literally rambled for 30 seconds and said nothing. I can't even begin to attempt to explain what he was trying to say. That is how out to lunch this promo was. And well, then he kept talking some more. He tried to basically say that he's still hurt and that he'll be back in the ring eventually, but it's between him and his doctor. He said, "I'm going to fulfill my contracts and be present at all the arenas." I believe he meant to say arenas. Or maybe he was channeling his inner Al Sharpton there for a minute, making up words that are kind of close to what he was trying to say, but not the actual word. And, yeah, this fucking blew. Watts brought up the fine stipulation for anybody that uses a chair, 2x4, dog collar chain, or tennis racket. It is a $10,000 fine levied at anybody who uses weapons in a regularly sanctioned match. Which means anything that's not no DQ. I seriously want you all to understand. Everything I just reiterated about that Sonny King promo, those were actual quotes. That word vomit catastrophe that I just mentioned, I didn't make a lick of that up. They chose to let that air. Think about that. This was pre-taped. They could have done multiple takes of that. Truth be told, that might have been the best take they could get. Holy smokes, that was awful. So then we go from that to this tag team squash with the Fantastics taking on Bob Owens and Tim Horton. No, not the retail chain Tim Horton. Just Tim Horton, the job guy. Was Tim Hortons actually around in 1984? I've never been there. I know virtually nothing about the Tim Horton food chain. It's actually more like a coffee chain, but that's beside the point. So, Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers are now more officially over than the Rock and Roll Express were just a few months ago. All it took was a campy video package where they were getting molested by a couple girls. And now every chick at the Irish McNeil Boys Club wants to fuck them. Ain't female psychology a wonderful thing? The Fantastics won in about 60 seconds. Joe Watts spent the entire time talking about the upcoming Kerry Von Erich Ric Flair heavyweight title rematch they booked in Japan, which I believe was the night that Kerry dropped the belt back to Flair after he won it at Texas Stadium that May. So that's where Joel's headspace was at during this quick TV bout. My mind was still fixated on that Sonny King promo. That took us to Dr. Death versus Rick McCord. Another quick get-over match to highlight Williams. I do have to agree with Joel and JR here. When they were putting over Dr. Death on commentary, he had made a lot of progress from where he had just started a couple years ago. And remember, when he debuted in Midsouth in '82, he was fucking rotten. Barely knew whether to wind his ass or scratch his watch in a wrestling ring. So it's great seeing how far he's come. Put in the work. You know, he's still not in the best ring shape he would be in. He really tapers down by like late 85, early 86. By that point, he was the complete package. But I'm purely delaying the only thing that mattered on this week's episode. Been hyping this one up for the better part of 2 weeks. So let's talk about it. The big tag team showdown. It's the Midnight Express taking on JYD and Hacksaw Duggan. Should have known we were in for an epic bout when the first thing Jim Cornette tells Boyd Pierce is, "Boyd, you look like the victim of an explosion at a firework plant." Little did Corny know about the explosion of pandemonium that was about to ensue. So before the Midnights come out, Crusher Khrushchev and Hercules Hernandez are doing a little huddle session with Cornette about something. You see Cornette pass off money to Hercules before he and Khrushchev leave. And of course, we're supposed to buy that he was telling his bodyguard to take a powder because he was not needed for this match. Didn't explain why Khrushchev was out there, but we'll come back to that. Here was the thing I couldn't figure out, though. Another one of those rare misfire logic gaps from Midsouth. In addition to Hercules leaving ringside for this bout, in addition to Jim Cornette having his tennis racket banned, in addition to JYD having his dog collar chain banned, this match was no disqualification. So why the hell didn't Cornette or Dog come out with their gimmicks? What was the ref going to do? They couldn't be disqualified for using them. And Mid-South couldn't find anybody because it was well within the parameters of being legal in this particular match. So that didn't make much sense. And the match was primarily one giant lopsided beatdown. I mean, the Midnights just bounced off Dog and Duggan like pinballs for 5 or 6 minutes straight. And they did turn things around on Dog momentarily before Duggan's big comeback. So, the match, for all intents and purposes, is fine. It's not blowaway, but it's not horrendous. And then we get the angle. The infamous powder botch that I'm sure most fans are at least peripherally aware of if you know your Mid-South timeline at least moderately well. And you know, I spent a little bit earlier blaming the Dog for how this all went down. I can't even in good faith solely blame the Dog for how horrible this came off. It was actually sort of Cornette's fault for fucking up with a bag of powder. What was supposed to happen was that while the Dog had a visual pin on Bobby Eaton, Cornette was supposed to sneak around ringside and throw the powder in the Dog's eyes to blind him. Now, of course, he does this behind Pee Wee Anderson's back, even though, again, it's no DQ. Shouldn't really matter that Cornette interfered in front of the referee. But the bigger problem here is that Cornette was finagling with this bag of powder from the moment he tried to reach into his pocket. So when he went to throw it into Dog's face, he completely missed by 1.5 miles. You could blatantly see it on camera from the hard cam side. Wasn't even close. But of course, Dog made it worse by not only selling the initial throwing of the powder, he then proceeds to blatantly roll around in the powder stain. And that right there, that was the moment where I threw my hands up and said, fuck it. This thing is officially off the rails. No turning back now. Not only did the spot look ridiculous, but it absolutely buried the Dog here. He looked like such a numbskull to every person in the building. You couldn't even hide the visual of him rolling his face in the powder. Any person with a clue would look at that and be like, he's powdering himself. What a dope. So while the Dog's on the floor selling, Duggan and Beautiful Bobby are doing some stuff in the ring. Duggan gives Bobby an atomic drop, which led directly to Cornette running in and missing an elbow drop. Instead, he hit Bobby by mistake. JR not missing a beat by calling it the awkward elbow. And so Duggan goozles Cornette and has him up in the chokehold for a minute before Hercules runs out with a coal miner's glove and decks Duggan from behind. I actually had to go back and rewind the tape because they said it was a coal miner's glove. I honestly just thought Hercules clubbed Duggan in the back of the head with his hand. Nope, turns out he was wearing a gimmick. Could barely see it. So then Bobby crawled on top of Duggan and pinned him to retain the belts. Yeah, that was quite the train wreck, wasn't it? You know, it's one of those things where I've gone back and rewatched this clip so many times over the years. In all fairness, it's not a terribly executed segment. Outside them completely fucking up the powder spot. But the whole thing kind of centers around it being Dog's final appearance in Mid-South. It was just such a whimper with the way he went out. And I guess the whole thing kind of encapsulates JYD's run in 1984. Complete miss. In every step of the way. Like the final image you see of Dog is him kneeling over Duggan with a face full of powder. It's just such a poetic ending. I don't know. You know, it's kind of like the way Hogan left WCW at the tail end, right? Like all that record business he did, all the eyeballs he brought over to see him in the NWO run roughshod for years. Like one of the final images you ever see of Hulk Hogan in WCW, it's him just meandering in the back after they had shot the work shoot at Bash at the Beach with him and Jarrett. And Russo went out there to cut that promo calling Hogan a bald piece of shit. That was it, though. Hogan's final appearance in WCW. The last thing you ever see of him. It's a backstage pre-tape where he's seen casually walking past Russo and leaving the building. And that was it. That was the last you saw of Hogan in any big capacity in like 2 or 3 years. It's kind of sad. So after the dust cleared and try to move on with the show, come back at ringside where Cornette was standing with Hercules, and he pretty much exposed the whole absurdity with the weapons ban story in Mid-South, saying that the boys can get fined for using chairs, 2x4s, dog collar chains, tennis rackets. No one ever said anything about a coal miner's glove, which is precisely the comment I made whenever Watts made that announcement a couple weeks ago. What's stopping any of the heels from just using another weapon? It's not like chairs, boards, chains, and rackets are the only gimmicks that have ever been used in Mid-South. Hell, the powder could have counted as a weapon in the scope of this conversation. So, yeah, they pretty much killed that storyline. He also correctly pointed out here, Duggan and Dog were the ones that asked for the no disqualification match. So they're responsible for even opening the door at the possibility of gimmicks being used. He ain't wrong. I know he's a heel, but he's got a point. In any case, we had a few minutes left for this Crusher Khrushchev Buddy Landel versus PYT's tag match. Oh, for the record, anybody still confused on what Khrushchev's involvement was for that previous segment? Pretty sure he was the one that allegedly gave Hercules a coal miner's glove, since he defeated Hacksaw Duggan in their coal miner's glove match months back. I guess that would count as his personal property. I'm just speculating, though. I have no idea. So, this is a total sprint match. They had less than 3 minutes of TV time remaining. There was a spot literally 30 seconds in where Coco tried to give Buddy a hip toss and completely dropped him on top of his head. Mostly because they were rushing through spots. The whole thing was very sloppy, but people were into the action because of the talent involved. It basically went off air with the Donnybrook four-way at the end. But I really didn't jot much down beyond that. The show overall wasn't that great, but there was a lot to talk about. I do recommend you check out the Midnights versus Duggan JYD match. Despite the clusterfuck ending, the match itself isn't terrible, and the people are going apeshit for just about everything in the match. So if you like those hot crowd environments, it's a fun one to check out. Try to avoid the Sonny King stuff like the plague. It's like I said before, though, this whole late summer period for Midsouth is just off. Like, there's a lot of stuff happening in terms of key talents being featured, the whole storyline over the weapon banning. But overall, it's just not a very captivating program at the moment. I mean, you got Sonny King at the forefront. The North American champion Magnum TA is yet again MIA and just not on the show for whatever reason. Yeah, there's a lot that's just missing the mark. It was always going to be difficult to top what they were doing in the first several months of the year when business was really hot and the shows every week were consistently great. But right now they're kind of hitting a ceiling. And I know there's still some great stuff upcoming before the end of the year. They just kind of neglected this whole lull period from late May of '84 through August. All right, world-class television. Our final stop in this absolute clusterfuck of a week of recording. What did we have going on here at the Sportatorium? Besides a double main event feature, one of which was just a replay package of the previous Kevin Von Erich Buzz Sawyer match they booked on television a couple weeks back. So can you really call it a double main event feature? That was some false advertising there. It is interesting how the landscape of the main event scene changed so quickly since, like, Texas Stadium. I mean, Buzz Sawyer and Matt Bourne had literally come into the territory within the last month. And all of a sudden they're being plugged immediately into the main event picture and working with all the top baby faces. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was very abrupt. It was, hey, Buzz Sawyer and Matt Bourne are here. Now they're working with Chris Adams and Kevin Von Erich. Cool. Still beats having to watch the Missing Link and Killer Khan work main events. Good Christ. I try not to think back to that period all that frequently. So the first prelim match this week is Tim Brooks and the Grappler taking on the Batten twins. I did notice that the Sportatorium was a lot fuller this week in terms of fan attendance. Fuller as in more than half the building was filled. So the crowd was a lot livelier than normal. They still were not all that invested in the Batten twins. It's unfortunate too, because, I mean, you can tell they're both really trying to get the people behind them. They're trying to work the underdog babyface role, but they don't really have the Fantastics or the Rock and Roll Express appeal to where they're easy to get sympathy on. I mean, for one, they're identical twins, so the people can't even really distinguish one from the other half the time. But even visually, they were just very plain, ordinary-looking guys. They didn't really have that kind of sex appeal or sex charm. Didn't have great bodies. They both had the porn stash thing going, which is generally a no-go for most women out there unless you're extremely charismatic and tall. Both of which were not the case in this scenario. So the match was okay in terms of the wrestling, but the people never really got into it. The heels worked over the Battens for a while. Don't ask me whether it was Bart or Brad. I ain't got the first clue. Eventually the Battens fired back on the heels. Broke down into a four-way as both heels went after a Batten twin. There was a misfire where Brooks accidentally caught the Grappler with a running knee lift. Then one of the Battens gave the Grappler a jackknife cover and got the pin. But the people did pop for the 3 count. So I can't say the whole thing was a miss. Yeah, the Battens are always a tough duo to talk about in the pantheon of classic tag teams. I think they were just a case of wrong place, wrong time. They never really got the chance to perform on a big nationwide scale. There was a brief window in like 86 where they showed tape of them on the Superstation when they were part of the Crockett Cup tournament. But because they primarily wrestled in the Central States, they never found their way over in the Carolinas to do anything for Crockett on a bigger stage. Frankly, I don't think Crockett would have found much use for him, considering all the great tag teams he had from basically 84 to 88. I mean, they were relatively big stars in smaller regions of the country. Smaller territories, that is. It's kind of like the old cliche, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around, does it make a sound? Kind of make that same comparison with the Battens. So, coming out of that, came back for this brief Chris Adams interview. Haven't really seen Chris on camera with the World Heavyweight Championship since he beat Rick Rude in July. I mean, this might have been our first time actually seeing him with the physical belt. Overall, he didn't really have much to say. He sort of talked about the rocky start to 1986, talked about the eye injury and how he was in a really dark place at the beginning of the year. But it was because of the people's support that they helped Chris get healthy again. And he will defend the world title with pride and honor, whether it's Chicago, LA, Illinois, Israel, Japan. If you didn't pick up on the slight error, just do a quick Google search. But yeah, that was that. He was asked about future plans and future title contenders. So he started rattling off a bunch of heels that he has taken issue with recently. Did a horrible job in doing so, but I'm not going to spend 5 minutes harping on Chris Adams botching his way through a promo. He was never a great promo to begin with. It accomplished what it needed to. Kind of. He's a white meat babyface champion that wants to honor the Dallas faithful. What more could you ask for? He was so much better as a heel. Him and Gino, man. They were like the best part of this show for the last 12 months. Now Gino's gone and Chris is back to being a boring, bland, vanilla babyface. That took us to Rick Rude versus Perry Jackson. At this point, Rude is kind of just buying out his remaining time before he leaves for Crockett in the fall. This is like the third or fourth squash he's had since losing the world title, and I mean, there's really no context to anything he's doing right now. He's just winning wrestling matches. There was a bit of talk about the physical similarities between Rude and the Dingo Warrior here, physique-wise. So they're obviously teasing something for when we see those two interact together. Although, as we've talked about before, it's going to be very short-lived. Aside from Rude going over here, the only other comment I made was Percy Pringle audibly yelling racist slander at Perry Jackson. This is a direct quote, so don't come at me. I'm purely reiterating what Percy said here. You're not a pro wrestler. You ought to be picking watermelons on the farm in Mississippi, boy. For the record, Perry Jackson was a black man. Again, don't shoot the messenger. I just recap the shit. I just work here, bro. How in the world Percy never got hashtag cancel for saying that? That is amazing. He's lucky it happened in Dallas when nobody was watching in 1986. So here was where they aired the highlight package of the Kevin Von Erich Buzz Sawyer TV match a couple weeks back. The one that ended via double count out. That was a match where Buzz got his ass beat for like 90% of the match and still wound up taking a powder by the end of the segment. They did show a pre-tape from Fort Worth too, where Sawyer and Matt Bourne tried to tie up Kevin with a dog collar chain and throw him over the top rope to the floor. But then Steve Simpson ran out to make the save. Funny how an angle like that would be considered a hospital angle or a career-ending injury in 1986. Think about that in today's context. A press slam over the top rope to the floor. That would barely be a commercial pitch spot. I'm not going to recap the match again. I mean, you can go listen to the show a couple weeks back to get my thoughts on that. We'll just go right to the main event here with Chris Adams and Matt Bourne. Gotta say, man, as flawed as guys like Matt Bourne were, that guy was a criminally underrated talent. For anybody that actually got to see Matt Bourne in his prime, and not the crappy WWF version of him when he was the original Doink the Clown, you don't know what you're missing until you've actually gone back and seen older footage of him. I mean, I loved his run in Midsouth with DiBiase and Duggan in the Rat Pack. But even there, he was only going to go so far, considering all the other top guys Watts was booking in the territory around that point. And he just wasn't there long enough to ever really make much of an impression. But, God, he was such a great worker. Never got the chance to reach his fullest potential. Personal and professional issues aside. And a lot of that rests on him. But he and Adams had a great TV main event. Both guys worked incredibly hard. God, Adams just sold and sold and sold for Bourne. Fans were super behind Adams by the end of it. Ring mat was completely stained in sweat by the time it was over. And as Bourne's beating on Adams, you see him finally go up and miss a seated splash, which ended up becoming his whoopee cushion finish in the WWF several years later. Sound effects and all. And then Adams just rolled up Bourne in a backslide and got the 3. At which point Bourne immediately tried to get some heat back on himself. But, nothing really came of it. Chris Adams made his own comeback and Matt Bourne powdered. It is kind of unfortunate to see Bourne and Sawyer doing so many jobs this early into their run. But like I've said before, I will take those two at the higher end of the card over some of the previous guys that they were featuring in those main events at one point. Especially the ones feuding with Von Erichs and Chris Adams. Next week they said we're getting Buzz Sawyer and Steve Simpson for the Texas Heavyweight title. So, yeah, we'll keep riding that gravy train. Steve Simpson. He's another guy they've been pushing up the card as of late. You know, it's still not a very great period for World Class right now in terms of who they have as the active top guys. I mean, Kevin's basically a one-man working crew right now. And yeah, Curtis Adams is the world champion, but there aren't too many guys for him to feud with right now. And Rude's about to leave in the next several weeks. Mad Dog and Bourne are good fill-in heels to keep the top babyfaces busy, but I mean, does anybody actually think they're ever going to win the world title? Either of those two? But you know, Watts and the UWF took so many guys away from Fritz once Ken Mantell left to go book for him in '86. And again, we're talking names that were just recently being featured in main events on world-class television as far back as, late May, early June? So many of those talents just up and left. It was kind of slim pickings for Fritz here in late summer of '86. That's not even taking into account that the WWF and NWA were picking up every major star in the book and signing them to contracts. Continuing the demise of the territories. And the only thing World Class still had right now was a semi-loyal fan base that loved the Von Erichs. But as we'll see very soon, that relationship did not last much longer. But, yeah. And that'll wrap it up there. Like I said, this week was just a total mess when it came to recording stuff, but I'm glad I got it all done. So this will be a normal Friday podcast. And yeah, I think we'll wrap it up on that note. So thanks everybody for checking the show out. Make sure you stop back on Monday for our Retro Raw rundown. I think it's the go-home show to SummerSlam 96. But, yeah, that's all I got for this one. So take care, everybody, and I will catch you guys soon. Peace out.